Welcome to Orthodontic Smiles, the podcast designed for all dentists and their staffs that practice orthodontics. Hi, I'm your host, Dr. Ed Gonzalez. The sponsor of our show today is the American Orthodontic Society. This is episode 1 of Orthodontic Smiles, and our very first interview will be with the Executive Director of the American Orthodontic Society, Colonel Tom Chapman. We hope you enjoy Orthodontic Smiles. Through our interviews and segments, we will innovate, educate, and inspire you and your staff. And now, for our first guest, Colonel Tom Chapman. Well, Orthodontic Smiles is very happy to welcome Colonel Tom Chapman. Colonel Chapman holds degrees in both from Southern Methodist University in finance and the University of Texas at Austin. Tom served 26 years in the United States Air Force, including 2 combat tours, and retired at the rank of colonel. During his career, he was selected and graduated from 2 highly competitive postgraduate programs, the Air Command and Staff College and the Air War College. Tom holds the Bronze Star and the Legion of Merit among numerous Air Force awards and decorations. Well, Tom, that's very, very impressive, and I've known you now for 20 years, and I feel strange calling you colonel, but you deserve that respect. And I'm just wondering, to be honest with you, how did the American Orthodontic Society end up with such a prestigious executive director? And by the way, welcome to Orthodontic Smiles.
Well, thank you, Ed. That's very generous, those comments. Serving the Air Force was a privilege, not just a career. But after I retired from the Air Force, I came back to Dallas, Texas, where I was raised, and was looking for my second career when it was brought up to me that there was a position opening. They call it an administrative position. Well, my expertise in the Air Force was administration as a career, and so it looked like something I would qualify for, although it was very vague as to what kind of organization it was. I applied. I was interviewed once, and then it was an interesting story in that the current executive director sitting in the chair was actually in the office when I was interviewed the first time, but was not involved in the interview process. So it was very confusing, and I liked that the executive director would be present, but not in the interview. About a month later, I was called back for another interview and was hired within 15 minutes after that interview from the board members that attended. What I found out later that made it kind of interesting is that some of the board members had been sitting around prior to knowing me saying what we really need is a military man in this organization to bring a little order. Now, that's a perception that they had. And when my resume was faxed in, which we did in those days, my resume was faxed in. That happened within 2 to 3 days after they talked about needing a military background. And so I think that's what probably led to my being brought into this position, as it is very unusual to be brought in directly as an executive director in this career field.
What year was that, Tom?
Well, it was 20 years ago, and it was 20 years ago, so it was 1997 that I went to work for this organization.
That was a very tumultuous time in the American Orthodontic Society, if I recall. That's about the time when the American Orthodontic Society split with the International Ortho Association.
Well, that was a big part of my interview, yes. That was a major part of my interview, because I had done some research and saw that the American Orthodontic Society and the International Association for Orthodontics talked merger, found that in some literature. And so I posed that question, and they assured me that that was not going to happen. And as I found out later, It certainly wasn't going to happen in that the politics to the two organizations were not going to allow it and the personalities were not going to allow it. But yes, that was a very tumultuous time.
But we held through it, and although it was very difficult at the beginning because we basically split everything 50-50, now we were on our own as an organization. And I'm really happy to be able to talk about these kinds of things because so many of our members are not familiar, or do they know about the history of the AOS. So I think it's important to talk about it because we've been through some really tough times, but we've come through it as a strong organization with around 3,000 members. So that's pretty darn good.
Yes, the organization now is in its beginning its 43rd year, and its initial mission has remained the same. Its sole purpose 3 years ago was to teach the growing number of general and pediatric dentists that wanted to learn and incorporate orthodontics, to teach them that clinical skill. And that today remains the primary focus. What the organization did shortly after its inception is that it really began to rely on one instructor, and that one instructor was probably one of the largest 2 or 3 names in the country in what we teach. But when I was hired, I asked the question, how can we really rely on one instructor? What if something happens? Well, ultimately, something did happen, and there was almost 9 years ago, there was an immediate retirement of the primary source of income for this organization.
And that was with Dr. Bob Garrity.
And that was with Dr. Bob Garrity.
Yeah. It's probably appropriate to announce that for those of our members who don't know, Dr. Garrity passed away at the end of December. And our sympathies go out to Kay, his wife, and the entire family. He will be sorely missed, and our organization has had some time to recuperate from his retirement, but his soul is with this organization. He did so much to build it up and make it what it is today.
It was a very difficult time for us and has remained challenging times for us, but what it did was evolve us into an organization away from just one primary instructor and honestly just one primary clinical thought. We certainly are still primarily non-extraction, and we are definitely straight bar orthodontics, but we have brought on a number of other instructors that are highly credentialed to teach orthodontics, and each may have a little bit different philosophy on how they treat, but we feel that that's a much better way to teach individuals, let them get their foundation and let them move on then to other instructors and other courses to build upon that foundation. So that's the way we've moved, and we are moving.
Well, after that time, we were kind of caught in lurch with Dr. Garrity retiring, and thank goodness we had Dr. Dave Jackson fill in, and he developed quite a following after that. So he basically kept the organization going.
Yes, he did. He did a tremendous job. He had he had learned at the footsteps of at the feet of Dr. Garrity, and while he made some changes to the way he treated, it was still essentially the traditional way that Dr. Garrity taught. His principles were the same in so many ways. Unfortunately, he had a disease that could only be managed for a certain period of time, and he passed away 2.5 years ago suddenly. And that left us again without a primary instructor. But he had mentored for 5 years one of our longtime members, Dr. Brad Williams, and we immediately turned the program over to Dr. Brad Williams. He now has developed his own program based upon Dr. Garrity and Dr. Jackson's teachings, and he has gone and is doing a very, very good job of continuing the comprehensive programs that are so critical to this organization.
You know, when we say comprehensive, I think we have to help those that are not members of the organization understand that what our teaching philosophy is to teach you. If you know nothing about orthodontics, we will educate you to a point where you will be able to do orthodontics. Of course, we don't expect you to do the hardest cases in the world, but we do teach very, very well and very thoroughly to be able to have someone go out and do a simple orthodontic case. Now, after many years of extended education, perhaps you can do much, much more, but I think our educational base is with Brad Williams is fantastic. I've sat in on some of his courses, and they are remarkably taught. He loves teaching, and you can tell it just by the way his mannerisms and the way he speaks to the students. So I have to commend him thoroughly. We have a lot of other instructors, senior instructors in our organization. Why don't you talk about some of them?
Well, we brought in one of them I'm talking to, Dr. Ed Gonzalez. Ed's been doing orthodontics for probably 30 years or more.
Well, 40 actually.
40 actually. And he has certainly become one of the premier instructors on early treatment. And when I arrived at this organization, early treatment was still a very controversial subject, and yet we were teaching it, and our doctors were practicing it long before the schools were willing to teach it to their residents. And that's another really strong part of this organization is that we all have dentists that are practicing, that are teaching, and so as they try new techniques, they are free then to discuss those techniques and to teach those techniques. And so we adapt a lot quicker to the changes in the marketplace than the universities can possibly do. But we also have, besides Ed, we have Dr. Jay Gerber. Jay Gerber has been teaching for over 30 years. He too started with Dr. Bob Garrity, but has gone on to expand his practice into TMJ and straight wire orthodontics. Very, very, very experienced lecturer. Dr. Bill Wyatt, who is lecturing now on occasion only, but Dr. Bill Wyatt's been teaching for over 40 years and practicing orthodontics for almost 48 years. He straight wire orthodontics only. He took a general practice and devoted it solely to orthodontics. Very experienced. And so we've got Brad Williams, as we've already said, and we've got Ed Gonzalez, we've got Jay Gerber, we've got Dr. Joe
Lenny Carapeza.
Lenny Carapeza is another one. Len Carapeza has been out of a suburb of Boston, and he's been practicing for well over 40 years and teaching for that period of time. Has been on the faculty at Tufts University. That's right. For 30 to 35 years and has lectured all over the world.
Chris Baker.
So, Chris Baker is another good one. Dr. Chris Baker is a pediatric dentist, originally out of Kentucky, is now operating out of East Texas. And Chris Baker's been teaching also for at least 30 years and very, very experienced, done thousands of cases, has practiced now the last few years over in Abu Dhabi as well. So those are all highly experienced. If you added up all the years of orthodontics of our senior instructors, I'm sure you would come to over 300 years, if not more than that.
Probably much more than that. I know that in May in Hawaii, we're doing a group seminar with the American Academy of Pediatric Dentists, and four pediatric dentists, Elsa Echeverry, Chris Baker, myself, and Lenny Carapeza, will be speaking at that seminar just after the American Academy of Pediatric Dentistry annual meeting. And together we were trying to figure out how many years all of us have been doing orthodontics, and it's well over, just the four of us, it's well over 100 years. So that's a lot of orthodontics being done by four people who will be teaching pediatric dentists at that seminar. Our intent at that seminar, by the way, is not to show you the orthodontics we do, but to show that pediatric dentists can do orthodontics and do it very well in our practices on a daily basis. So we're excited and can't wait for that to happen. Tom, not to waste too much time, I know we've got a tremendous number of senior instructors, but I'd like to get into a couple of other things that I think are kind of important. One of them is credentialing. Our organization has developed one of the most sophisticated credentialing programs in the country, and it's taken off like wildfire. We've almost doubled the number of diplomates of our organization, and it will stand. I think that our credentialing system can stand up against any other.
Absolutely. While this organization had a credentialing program for many, many years, it was about 10, 12 years ago that one of our real originators, Dr. Roger Rupp, suggested that we start what he then called the Academy or College or Academy of Diplomates. So the idea really germinated with him. Unfortunately, he passed away before we could take any action. But after that, we separately incorporated our credentialing organization as appropriate, all valid credentialing programs are disassociated from the main organization. That's essential. With the leadership of Ed himself, we were able to develop our own testing procedures. We were able to find examiners, many of examiners, so we can change examiners. We do double-blind testing. There are many factors. We do written examinations, and that, as a result, the credentialing program has really ramped up in this organization.
Yep.
And if you achieve board eligible, which is the precursor to the diplomate, which is the highest level, you have to have a minimum of 500 hours of continuing education in the field of orthodontics or related to orthodontics. It is a very impressive group of people that come through those programs.
Yes, it is. Well, one other thing I'd like to bring up, and that is I'm so proud of this organization because it's being run by a tremendous board of directors that set the policy and for our executive director and has helped this organization grow. We just now started with a new president, and why don't you introduce him?
Well, it's Paul Winburn is our current president. Paul's a general dentist out of Fort Smith, Arkansas. And I think one of the strong parts of this board, the way that it operates, first of it is operates on policies. That's absolutely essential. There's very little to none flying by the seat of the pants because we have a policy for virtually anything that the board has to do. The board's primary purpose is governance, and our policies lay that out very clearly. But the most important thing is that our members decide who the directors are going to be through an open nomination system and then an open general membership vote. There are no I guess we might want to say backroom activities that go on. That doesn't happen. It's a very transparent process. And so as a result of that, our directors change about 2 a year. So about every 5 or 6 years, we've totally turned over the board. And that's a very strong component to effective governance in an organization, is that you keep your board of directors evolving. So you get new thoughts, you get new opinions. And we do allow a couple of, at least one legacy position on the board, someone that was here. Ed's been fulfilling that for several years, someone that's familiar with the history of the organization. But the rest of the board changes every year. And I think that's a strong component of our governance program for this organization.
Well, the board has developed some tremendous things that that are leaving a legacy behind, and that is one of them is the American Orthodontic Society Foundation.
Yes, the foundation was created prior to my arrival, but it was created about 22 years ago at this point, and it was a traditional charitable foundation that is separate and distinct from our primary society. It has been able to provide cases for individuals that could not afford orthodontics. If the doctor volunteers in our organization, volunteers their time, we'll help them and sponsor them on the case. We've also created a scholarship program. We currently have scholarships at 3 different universities. We've been doing it for a total of 18 years at this point, was our first scholarship. And we've provided over $100,000 of scholarship money to those 3 universities, to those students that badly need it in those universities. And it all, absolutely every dollar, comes through donations from our membership.
Well, and they have done a great job, and we have an actual seminar that's sponsored the day before our annual meeting, and it's sponsored by the foundation, and that's how we arrive at some of the donations that come into the foundation for the work. So and we have some very philanthropic members who do donate to the foundation regularly, and we appreciate that so much. Well, Tom, where do you see our organization going?
Well, I see our education continuing to grow, and I believe we're always going to be core straight wire, core non-extraction, because that's where we believe general and pediatrics ought to be headed in their ortho practice. I know that we're going to continue to add courses, so I call it kind of a diversity. We're going to have a diversity of courses because there are always going to be members that want to move beyond what they learned in the basic programs, and we want to give them a ladder that they can climb clinically. And so I see that continuing to be very, very, very important. The other aspect of this is that, quite frankly, advocacy has become extremely important, and we will continue to advocate for the general practitioner. We've been very successful over the last few years when a general practitioner or a pediatric practitioner has been refused payments by insurance companies, refused by Medicaid organizations to allow them to perform because they were not a specialist or not an ortho specialist. We've been able to intervene with our attorney, and we've made great strides in that. We will continue to do advocacy. I believe that's critical to what they're doing. And so that's one direction that I think we're going to see. We're going to continue to grow our clinical journal. We're very proud of what we have done with our clinical journal over the last 13 or 14 years. And I believe that will continue to grow in relevance to the community as well.
Well, Tom, you're a big factor in how this organization has grown, and I'd like to thank you personally from the members for your hard work and the staff, I might add. The staff at the AOS is fantastic. Very small, but very, very good staff that works very hard every day to make this organization what it is today. So I want to thank you for being on today, Tom, and all the work you've done. Let me just tell you a little bit, since I have you on the line here. Let me tell you a little bit about the podcast. This is something new for the organization, and I think it's going to be beneficial. We're going to be getting into, I thought it was appropriate to have you on to start with, but in the future, this podcast will be for practicing dentists who do orthodontics. Whether you're an orthodontist, a general dentist, or a pediatric dentist, and you're doing orthodontics in your practice, you're welcome to listen to our podcast. In the future, it will be more technically oriented rather than casual. We will be talking to some of the big names of orthodontics all over the world through the beauty of Skype here. But we'll be talking to them and talking about their products and the kinds of orthodontics they do. 2 segments that we're going to be initiating on the next podcast, which I might add, we will have our senior instructor, Dr. Brad Williams, will be our guest on our next podcast, episode 2. But 2 of the segments that we're going to have is, one of them will be called a Critical Orthodontic Review. And that is where we're going to take 2 of our members and have them review products that are being used in offices today, and independently give us an idea of what they think about the product and how it's benefiting or not benefiting them in their practice. And then the last one will be a segment on practice management. So we think that that will be an important aspect to this podcast that will be given by big names in practice management, and also the dental assistants. We're not forgetting about them. They are an integral part of our practices, and we're going to have some guests that will talk about being a really good staff member. This is your host, Dr. Ed Gonzalez. I want to thank you for listening to Orthodontic Smiles today. If you enjoyed our broadcast, please click the subscribe button. We'll be in touch with you in the future about our further broadcasts. Thanks for listening.